Coming up on Arirang News, more than 300 South Koreans arrived back in their home country on a special flight from Wuhan. Now they'll be isolated in quarantine for the next 2 weeks. In the meantime, South Korea confirms its 11th case of the coronavirus. The World Health Organization declares the coronavirus outbreak a global health emergency, urging countries to step up their screening. It's now in more than 20 countries or territories. And some bright spots in the South Korean economy. 3 key indicators, production, consumption, and investment, are all up for the second month in a row. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. We now have 11 confirmed cases of the coronavirus here in South Korea. 4 new cases were confirmed this afternoon. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says one of the patients had returned from Wuhan last Thursday. That patient is a 62-year-old woman, and she was on the same plane as South Korea's 7th patient. Information on the other 3 newly added patients is still being confirmed. And the first batch of South Koreans coming from Wuhan have arrived at 2 public facilities where they'll be isolated in quarantine for the next 14 days. 200 of them will be staying at a facility in Asan, while the other 150 will be housed in Jincheon, cities both south of Seoul. They're part of the 368 South Koreans that flew in from Wuhan this morning on a chartered flight. The 18 passengers that have showed symptoms of the coronavirus have been transferred to state-designated hospitals for treatment. Seoul's foreign ministry is currently in close consultations with the Chinese government to arrange another flight tonight to bring back another 250 Koreans still stranded in Wuhan. Meanwhile, China continues to report more deaths from the coronavirus. China's National Health Commission says that now 213 have died and around 9,700 people are infected. Meanwhile, there are now confirmed cases of the virus in more than 20 countries or territories, prompting the World Health Organization to declare a global public health emergency. Kim Jae-hee has the latest.
The World Health Organization has declared the coronavirus outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. The Director General for the WHO said on Thursday during a news conference in Geneva that the main reason for the declaration is not because of what is happening in China, but because of what is happening in other countries.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus. Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems and which are ill prepared to deal with it.
He also stressed that the WHO continues to have confidence in China's capacity to control the epidemic and that there's no need at this time for measures that interfere with travel and trade. The WHO declares international health emergencies for only extraordinary events that cause health risks to other countries by spreading internationally and potentially require a coordinated international response. The declaration alerts WHO member countries to step up precautionary measures, such as screening travelers and monitoring international trade. This is the 6th time such an emergency has been declared by the WHO. Meanwhile, more cases are being reported in countries all over the world. The U.S. confirmed on Thursday its first incident of human-to-human transmission. The infected man in his 60s from Chicago is the husband of a woman who had previously traveled to China and was confirmed as having the virus. This brings the total number of infected U.S. patients to 6. France also reported its 6th case on Thursday. France was the first country in Europe to have confirmed a coronavirus case. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
South and North Korea have closed down their liaison office because of the coronavirus. So for the time being, they've set up a direct phone and fax line so they can keep in touch. Seoul's Unification Ministry says the 2 sides checked the connection last night and spoke on the phone this morning. The line will be open from 9 to 5 every day. Also on Thursday night, because of the coronavirus, North Korea told South Korea to postpone the removal of South Korean facilities from the North's Mount Kumgang resort. South Korea's chief nuclear envoy, Lee Do-hoon, went to European Union headquarters on Thursday to meet with the EU's Political and Security Committee. Officials say Lee asked for their support for the Korean peace process. He also explained Seoul's plans for completely denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. In response, they said they support Seoul's plans and said dialogue with North Korea is important. He also met the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, Helga Schmidt. They talked about the prospects for future denuclearization talks. This year, South Korea is marking the 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War, and so it's set up a special committee tasked with taking better care of the war's veterans. The Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs said on Friday that Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun will head what will be called the 70th anniversary of the Korean War Commemoration Committee. It's made up of 31 members, including senior government officials and private experts. Under the slogan of memory, togetherness, and peace, they'll launch projects to enable citizens to easily pay their respects to the veterans and those who died during the war. Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun said today that a team will be set up under his office to prepare for the government's planned reforms of the police and the prosecution. In a televised briefing Friday, Chung said the government is working to get a bill passed in the early part of this year to set up an independent unit to investigate corruption among public officials, including the police. The plan also includes giving the police more investigative authority. A separate bill's already been passed to set up an independent unit to investigate corruption among high-level officials. For that unit, with preparations to be made under the PM's office, he said it's expected to start its work in July. President Moon, meanwhile, according to the Justice Minister, said setting up the preparatory office is very meaningful. The president also said there's a need to disperse authority democratically and set up checks and balances among powerful institutions. The world's megacities, like Seoul, face a number of issues like environmental problems and social inequality. So in the hope of improving people's lives in urban areas, the French Cultural Center in Seoul invited experts to discuss the cities of tomorrow. Kan Hyung-woo has this story.
What is the ideal city of tomorrow? Under the theme of Night of Ideas, the French Cultural Center in Korea brought experts together in Seoul on Thursday evening to try to find the answer. One of the solutions was to share what's already been established.
And this can be the new idea of smart cities and how we can optimize the use of what we already have. It's not about growing the city more, but more about how can we optimize what's already built.
While making use of what's already in these urban areas, the experts said cities should make sure they align their future plans with sustainable development. They also pointed out that big cities need to focus on improving the lives of their young, elderly, and poor residents.
We've moved past the fast developing and building cities phase. One good sign is that local governments are finding budgets for children in their respective regions.
Meanwhile, the participants talked about South Korea's residential spaces and what the development of apartment blocks meant for the country.
When we didn't have an ideal living space, there were not many developed cities in South Korea. Getting an apartment was people's chance for happiness.
The French Cultural Center in Paris started the Night of Ideas in 2016 to talk about various topics facing today's world. The event has gone worldwide since then and now takes place on the last Thursday of every January in about 100 cities, including Los Angeles and London. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
There are concerns that the coronavirus will not only hurt China's economic growth, but South Korea's economy and global growth as well. Kim Hae-sung reports.
The impact of the coronavirus on South Korea's economy is limited for now, but there are concerns that it could have a negative impact depending on how the virus spreads. That's what South Korea's first Vice Finance Minister Kim Yong-bum said Friday, adding that the government will closely monitor the impact of the virus on the real economy and financial markets and take preemptive measures if needed. He added that the Finance Ministry will work with other government ministries, including the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, to stop any unfair trading practices and help stabilize the prices of medical goods such as masks, which have soared since the virus outbreak. The economic spillover effect of the epidemic remains unknown, but according to Hyundai Research Institute, the spread of the virus could pull down South Korea's economic growth by up to 0.2 percentage points this year. It said the virus could not only increase financial market volatility, but also have a negative impact on the local tourism industry, resulting in a drop of up to $2.4 billion in tourism income. As for the virus's impact on China's economy and global growth, the IMF said it is too soon to quantify the numbers, adding that uncertainty is high. IMF spokesman Jerry Rice on Thursday said the direct impact on consumer demand has been most severe in Hubei province, the origin of the virus, and that tourism and commerce has come to a halt throughout China. He said on the supply side there have been production stoppages, and the extent of the impact depends on how quickly the virus spreads and who it affects. The 2002 to 2003 SARS outbreak, which also came from China, killed about 800 people and cost the global economy an estimated $33 billion. But with China now accounting for a larger share of the world economy, there are concerns that the economic impact of the coronavirus could be bigger this time. 김혜성, 아리랑 뉴스.
Korea's industrial output for December once again showed growth. Consumption and investment were up from the previous month. Our Kim Da-mi has the details.
Industrial output in South Korea increased for the second month in a row in December. Statistics Korea said on Friday that the country's industrial output edged up 1.4% in December compared to the previous month.
Overall industrial output rose compared to the previous month thanks to the increased output of mechanical equipment and electric equipment.
By sector, however, production in the service sector was down 0.1% in December, mainly due to real estate, which was down 2%. Facility investment jumped almost 11%, led by machinery and transport equipment. And retail sales also rose slightly on higher demand for automobiles and home appliances for fine dust. The coincident index, which measures current business conditions, went up slightly for the first time in 4 months. And the leading economic index, which shows future business conditions, also continued to rise for the 4th consecutive month. In fact, it is the first time in almost 3 years that the two indices rose together. As for the recent coronavirus outbreak and its economic impact, the agency noted that the SARS outbreak back in 2003 only affected the service sector. But it added that further impact, even in the local manufacturing sector, will be analyzed depending on how the current crisis unfolds. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
The WHO has of course declared the coronavirus outbreak a global emergency, only the 6th time it's ever done that. What kind of effect has this declaration had on the markets, and how do you see this playing out?
Yes, as you said, the World Health Organization declared on Thursday that coronavirus epidemic in China now is a public health emergency of international concern. However, the WHO director announced the decisions in terms of it intertraveling. It is not prohibited. He has also said that let it be clear that this declaration is not a vote of no confidence in China. The greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to other countries with weaker health systems. And he showed some confidence in terms of having control over this disease by Chinese government. Clearly, after that announcement, if you look at the U.S. market, it has recovered. Before that, it was falling by around 1 percentage point. It recovered, and U.S. market recovered by around 0.2 to 0.3% from 3 major indices. So clearly, the signals is positive in that the U.S. market is kind of seems to be immune from this, but as for the Korean market, though, it is getting quite heavily affected, and some of the Asian market, including Taiwan as well as Japan, were getting affected more severely than U.S.
Yeah, as you say, this afternoon, pretty much as soon as it was announced that there were 4 new cases of coronavirus in the country here, we saw the local markets take a dive. Tell us about that.
Right, as you said, I'm not sure whether that is that severely concerned, but nevertheless, people were heavily concerned about the coronavirus and that Korea market had a massive decline, and it is the last day of January, so it kind of went together. If you look at the Korean market, yesterday it heavily sold. It was down by 1.7% for Kospi, and the Kosdaq was down over 2%. And then today, it was reasonably doing okay, and then it fell again by 1.35% for Kospi. Kosdaq is actually down by more than 2%. Continuously, this key concern is that whether this coronavirus will have any massive implications for the domestic consumption, given the fact that Korea is quite heavily dependent on the Chinese travelers. So the tourist-related industries might be heavily affected in the future. We don't really know how aggressively the implication will be, so people are kind of not happy with the uncertainties, and therefore that is affecting the market at this point in time. However, though, we think that the fatality rate of this disease is only 2.2% rate. So we don't think that this will be a very long-term lasting, and that the Korean equity market seems to be extremely cheap in terms of the valuation, including the PR as well as the PBR. And the overall Korean market is heavily dependent on the export side. And we think that the export plays will be reasonably okay, including the semiconductor businesses. So the reaction is very heavy, but I think it's overreacting. And always it creates a buying opportunities. But we don't know when this disease picking in terms of numbers of people. So we need to watch and then create a strategy where you buy into the dip rather than buying aggressively in the future.
Got it. Well, we also see global oil prices on course for their worst month in quite a while. Also, of course, because of the coronavirus. What's happening there, and what's your outlook?
Right. As far as the most of other market and also various financial instruments are showing stabilities. A lot of people kind of piled into the safety assets, including gold, silver, and bonds of U.S. At the beginning of this. But in the recent days, we are seeing that stabilizing. Oil price did tank as low as $52, but now it is up back to about $54 level. Also, the interest rates fell as low as 1.5% territories for 10 years U.S. government bond, but now it has recovered to reasonably to about 1.6% territories. Also, even Taiwanese market, Japanese market all showed some recovery today. So most of the people are kind of taking a little bit of breather. Also, I think the people are expecting that the money supply growth rate from the China as well as U.S. will pick up if any concerns in regards to the economic recession worries happens. So therefore, we think that we have a very strong government on both sides of China as well as U.S. And because of that, we think that the proper measures will be made to provide ample liquidity as well as the fiscal support. So we don't think that global economy will go into global recession. We think that we will see fairly reasonable growth period in this year.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insights. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend. Thank you.
In other news, it's finally happening. The UK is officially leaving the European Union. After years of people asking when, the question now is, what's next? Our Oh Soo-young reports from London.
3.5 years after the UK narrowly voted to leave the European Union, Friday closes a chapter on its 47-year membership of the regional bloc. But that's not the end of the story. The withdrawal agreement, which goes into force at 11 p.m. in the UK, also marks the start of what are expected to be long and grueling trade negotiations. The various sticking points include rules on regulatory standards, fishing, banking, energy and transport. But while the two sides slug out a deal, a transition period takes effect. This means current EU rules and standards on trade, freedom of travel and business continue to apply, though the UK loses its voice in the bloc's institutions. UK officials have expressed a willingness to start talks straight away. But EU ministers must first agree on a motion to do that at a meeting in late February, meaning the negotiations are likely to start in early March. A UK-EU summit in June is expected to serve as a check on progress. June is also the final month that the UK can ask the EU to extend the transition period up to 2022. However, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has firmly ruled out that option. Then this means officials would have to draw up a deal by late November if they want to end the transition period with a viable agreement. But is 11 months long enough to work out such a deal? Brussels has made it clear that it won't give the UK zero tariff access to its single market if it doesn't comply with EU regulations on the production and trade of goods. At the same time, the UK has refused alignment with EU standards. The disagreements are expected to complicate the negotiation process.
So I think what we will see is an interim deal to make sure that by the end of the year there is not a cliff edge and the UK doesn't leave without an agreement. But I think that this would be only the first one of multiple agreements that will need to be negotiated and signed in future years, not only on economics, but also on political issues, possibly also on social issues, foreign policy as well. So
the UK crosses the point of no return, but the future of its trade and political ties with Brussels, as well as the status of some 5 million citizens composed of EU nationals living in the UK and Brits in Europe, remain unclear. The quagmire that is Brexit looks far from over. Young, Arirang News, London.
South Korea and Israel are the top two countries in the world in terms of venture investment as a percentage of their national GDP. Startups are at the core of their future industries, so nurturing this sector is essential for future growth. There are also several qualities the two sides have in common that make them startup powerhouses in their respective regions. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
Israel is known as the startup nation, meaning the country basically runs on startups. 10% of Israel's total population of 9 million is involved in a startup, the most startups per capita in the world. 4% of GDP goes into R&D for startups in the tech sector. And Israel offers great inspiration for South Korea in its efforts to become a startup powerhouse, as they have some things in common. According to business magazines like Forbes and Entrepreneur, the key pillar of Israel's startup ecosystem is military experience. It says 2 or 3 years of mandatory military service helps people adapt quickly and connect with each other. South Korean men also have to serve in the military for a little under 2 years. Like Korea, Israel lacks natural resources, so it focuses on human resources to offset that. And now 1.4 million of its people are in the high-tech industry. This high-quality workforce makes the country a lucrative market for foreign investment, attracting some 350 global R&D centers like those of Google and Microsoft. These factors are what foreign investors say is attractive about South Korea.
And in general, in Korea, business is relationship-based, so it requires a little bit more time and commitment. But then when you get to know your business partner, it's kind of like a deeper connection.
I think Koreans are very creative in terms first of technology, we all know it, but as well in marketing strategies.
Given these commonalities, South Korea has been benchmarking Israel's startup culture in ways such as boosting private-public cooperation. This is a local incubator to support startup companies. It is based on Israel's Technological Incubators Program, or TIP. Like in Israel, the program is run privately using public funding. But this year, along with monetary support, the government has pledged some significant deregulation policies. With this changing business environment, South Korea is expected to raise its national prestige once again, this time as a global startup hub. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.